If you live with chronic illness and feel like you and your body are in a constant fight, this is the episode for you. Stay tuned as my guest and I chat all about how you can befriend your body and your illness and how doing so can actually help you heal. Welcome back to the Power in Motion podcast. If you're tuning in for the first time, I'm so thrilled that you're here. I'm Kim, your host, and this podcast is here to help you empower yourself to live your healthiest life, body, mind, and spirit, without diets, punitive workouts, and living by the scale. As a certified body image coach, size-inclusive personal trainer, and non-diet nutritionist, my mission is to help women feel great in and about their body at any size, so they can do the things that really matter in life. Now, if you've been hanging around, you'll remember a few episodes back where I shared my recent journey with chronic illness. Back in December of 2023, after many months, actually probably years if I'm being honest, of feeling unwell, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So if you missed that episode, go back and listen to episode number 119. Let me tell you, it has been an emotional journey. And I've learned a lot through it about how best to support my body and how to care for myself on a deeper level. One of the resources that I've found most helpful along the way is a podcast called the Fibromyalgia Podcast, which is hosted by Tami Stackelhouse. And I am so honored that Tammy is here today as our guest. But this episode isn't just relevant for people with fibromyalgia. What we talk about here will be applicable for anyone who lives with chronic pain or illness or even perimenopause or aging. We're really talking about the theme of feeling like you don't feel at home in the body you live in. Like you and your body are in this constant battle where your body just doesn't cooperate with the vision you have for yourself and your life. So if you can relate to that on any level, this episode is for you. Inside, Tammy and I talk all about how to come into an accepting and friendly relationship with your body, even when your body doesn't work quite right. We talk about how to use tracking and data to support your healing, and how chronic illness can actually be an invitation to care for ourselves better and to have better boundaries. So let me tell you a little bit about Tami. Tami Stackelhouse is doing all she can to give fibromyalgia patients the knowledge, care, and support they need to thrive. A fibromyalgia patient herself, Tammy has gone from disabled to having her fibromyalgia in remission. For more than a decade, her compassion, gentle support, and fun coaching style have helped fibromyalgia patients all over the world take back control over their lives. She is the executive producer of the fibromyalgia documentary Invisible and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute, where she teaches her certified fibromyalgia coach training program. You'll find Tammy sharing her joy and expertise on her fibromyalgia podcast and through her award-winning books, Take Back Your Life and The Fibromyalgia Coach. So it's a real honor to have Tammy here today. Let's just jump right on into the interview. Tammy, it is such a joy to welcome you to the Power in Motion podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm thrilled to have you here. As we were talking off camera, your podcast and your work has made such a difference in my life as a person who's recently been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. So I'm thrilled and honored to have you here to share your expertise with my listeners and shed some light on how we can be friends with our body and whatever aches and pains or illness we might be living with.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh, I can't wait. So why don't you get us started by sharing a little bit about your own story and how you came to be doing this wonderful work that you're doing now?
Yeah. So, if we want to go way back, I was one of those kids who was like always at the doctor. There was always something wrong. And so by the time I think I was just finishing high school, I remember this very distinct moment where I was, just kind of talking out loud to myself and to God. And I was like, if my body was a car, I would have qualified for the lemon law by now. Like, there's a lot wrong here, and can't we just do something about that? And I think I was only about 18 at the
Wow.
time that I had that thought. I had been diagnosed with chronic headaches. If I was a kid now, I would have also been diagnosed with IBS, depression, like a bunch of stuff, right? But,
Yeah.
back in the 70s, they didn't do that so much.
Mhm.
And so that just kind of was my norm. That was the body I lived in, right?
Mhm.
And so when I got to my 30s, and finally was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, it was just like another thing, right? I just was like, "Oh, of course, this is what my body does." And so for me, I got so bad with my fibromyalgia that at one point I literally could only leave the house once a week.
Wow.
If I left the house more than once a week, then that actually would be detrimental. It would take me out for a while, right? But if
Wow.
I only
Yeah.
left the house once a week, then I at least kind of held steady, right? And so I kind of started, of course, researching, looking for what can I do. But really, the biggest moment for me was something my husband said to me. Uh, I was a pretty new bride. I think we had been married for maybe about 6 months when this happened. And I was making those comments that we women often make, particularly when we have something that isn't quite right in our bodies. I was talking about how I was fat and how my body didn't work right and like all these things. And he just stopped me. He said, every time you say something like that, you're basically calling me a liar.
Oh.
Like, excuse me? This is about you at all. What are you talking about?
Yeah, right?
And he said, I chose you. I think you're beautiful. So when you say stuff like that, you're calling me a liar. I was like,
Wow.
oh.
Mhm.
And so, like, that really, like, that was the trigger that started me thinking about, is there another way that I could think about this?
Mhm.
And I started thinking about, our bodies are amazing,
Mhm.
right? They were made to heal. You break a bone, it grows back together. You
Yeah.
cut yourself, it heals, right? Like that's what our bodies are made to do.
Mhm.
Why would fibromyalgia be any different? Right. And so instead of it being me against my body, right? I'm living in this, there's the real me, and then there's this defective body I'm stuck inside, right? Which was basically my attitude.
Mhm.
And then shifting that to my body and I, we want the same thing, right?
Yeah.
We're on the same side. We want to feel better. And, if fibromyalgia has to be the enemy, then that's the enemy, but I don't think it even has to be, and it isn't now. But, we all have to start somewhere. And I think
Right.
you and your body on the same side against whatever it is you're fighting is a much better place to be.
Yeah, and I love that perspective because I know when I was first diagnosed, and I'm sure, as well, I will say, like, we are gonna probably mention fibromyalgia specifically because that's both of our lived experience, but I think anybody who lives with a chronic illness or chronic pain can identify with that feeling of betrayal. Like, that's how I felt when I was first
Absolutely.
diagnosed, is like, my body has betrayed me, like, and I was mad,
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
angry that my body had failed me and that my body had let me down, and I think, we need to validate those feelings, like, that those feelings make sense, and they need space to be there
Absolutely.
and as
Yep.
part of the process. But then I found your podcast and you said something very similar, and I was like, "Oh, maybe my body's just trying to tell me something, like, this is an invitation
Mhm.
to listen better and, like, really nurture my relationship with my body." So can you tell me more about what that was like when you were just starting to put those pieces together and come on board with your body and make friends with your body? Where did you start and what did that journey look like?
Yeah, because that's a big thing, right? And especially if you've been living with a chronic health condition like fibromyalgia or headaches, chronic daily migraines, headaches, those kinds of things can really you almost check out of your body, right?
Mhm.
Because you have to in order to survive and get through the day. So you sort of check out from the neck down, right?
Yeah.
And so checking back in, tuning back in was scary and overwhelming. And what do I do with all of this, right? Information that's coming my way. So, one of the things that I did during that time is I did a lot of journaling. It really helped me to just kind of get that out of my head to kind of
Mhm.
help me process it. There wasn't really anything in particular I was doing when I was journaling. It was more like, talking to myself maybe, but just
Thought
writing it down.
dumping.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And just kind of trying to process all of that. How did I get here? What was life like? The frustration of living in a body that doesn't quite work right.
Mhm.
But then also that kind of started to shift into, oh, I noticed today that if I do this, this happens, good or bad, right? Like just
Mhm. Mhm.
starting to notice these are the things that help me feel better. These are the things that don't.
Good.
And somewhere along that line, one of the things that happened is I got a pedometer. Like this would have been back in the early 2000s. So, it was
Oh,
a separate pedometer. It wasn't these fancy things we wear now.
right.
But I carried that thing around and actually learned how to manage my energy by watching the number of steps that I went. And I mean, I'm sort of a math science girl anyway. That data was really, really helpful for me because it became less about how I felt or what I thought I should be able to do or not do. And it became a more external, concrete, this happens if this happens. This is how many steps. Here's, the number where I feel good at every day.
Mm.
And that was a big turning point for me there. About that time, I also started working with my own health coach, and that was huge because, you know, we get so lost out in the weeds sometimes, when you're in it yourself, you can't always see where you're
Mhm.
going. You
Mhm.
can't,
Mhm.
it's just hard.
Yeah.
And so working with her was really helpful for me. She actually didn't know anything about fibromyalgia. So it wasn't so much that, but just somebody to process stuff with, I did this, I ended up in a huge flare, and we would have this conversation about, okay, how could you do that differently next time?
Mhm.
And just this idea that, like you just said, our bodies are giving us information. They are telling us what they need. And, it's like its own new language we have to learn,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And having that other person to process that with, talk that through with, really, I think helped me get on the same page as my body a little bit quicker than maybe I would have otherwise.
Yeah, I love that. It is very easy to get, at least I know myself, and, like, I know lots about fitness and about food and all of the things, but I find when I'm working with myself, it's easy to overthink things and get confused and, like, and just not be objective, right? So,
Right.
even
Right.
as a coach, I think we all need a coach to kinda help bring us back and keep us in check and not get overwhelmed.
Mhm.
I would love to come back to the what you said about tracking, 'cause
Yeah,
this is actually something that we've discussed on the show a number of times and how, like, separate from chronic illness, how our relationship with tracking is something to watch, right? Because there's
absolutely. Yep.
tendency to judge ourselves based on external metrics, right? Like, have I done enough? Did I work hard enough? Was my heart rate high enough? Like, these are things that I see in the fitness world that can be problematic. But like you, I found that tracking has provided some useful data in terms of how I manage my energy and how I work out and just noticing what things that I do and how they affect my energy and my pain. It was listening in a podcast of your own where you talked about tracking and how feeling good at the end of the day, it means that you have energy left for healing.
Yes.
Not that. I guess, like, it's so easy to say, like, "Oh, well, I'm not exhausted. I'm not in pain. I could have done more."
Or you take the moment to actually go do more.
Yeah, so that we can hit those external validation, like, metrics of, like, what everybody says you should be able to do, but, it's giving yourself that permission to feel good and let
Mhm.
that be enough and know that feeling good means there's reserves so your body can do the work it needs to do to heal. That made it
That's right.
that was a
That's
big
right.
mind shift for me.
Yeah, and that's a really important thing, particularly if you're dealing with a condition that comes with fatigue.
Mhm.
If you've got a bad knee and it hurts, that might be a little bit different. If you're recovering from a knee injury, then again, maybe not. But particularly when we have these conditions that affect our energy levels, when we feel good, we wanna do all the things, right?
Yep.
Because, like, this feels like my only opportunity. So I have to do all the things because who knows when I'll get a chance to do this again, right?
Oh.
And then, of course, we crash. But if we can even out that push crash cycle, right?
Mhm.
Not do all the things and then not crash as far, we can actually even that out. Our energy becomes more predictable.
Mhm.
We heal, right? And we actually, in the end, can get more done. So I try to teach my students and clients that you want to leave about 20% of your energy at the end of the day. Sleeping takes energy, folks.
It's
Healing takes
true. Yeah.
energy. If you've ever been sick, cold, flu, anything like that, you are tired because your body is using energy to heal itself. So, how are you ever going to get better if you're using all of your energy and then some every day?
Yeah.
Like the math doesn't work.
No, no. Do you use the spoon theory? Do you
Oh,
use
yes.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that too, of like, if someone without chronic illness has 20 spoons in a day, and they spend those going to work and doing their workout and looking after their children and maybe going out to see friends and sleeping and whatever. That's fine, right? And then they might have 4 or 5 spoons left over at the end of the day where they can do something extra. But those of us with chronic illness start out with less spoons as it is. And like you
Yeah,
say, then we need to save some spoons for healing, right? If we use all of our spoons or go into a deficit, then we're starting out that next day with even less and even less,
right.
less, right?
Right. It's like budgeting your money,
Yeah.
right? I mean, yeah, sure, you can borrow from tomorrow, but you're gonna pay more for it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And you got to plan for that, right? And if you don't, then you're going to end up in a flare and you're not going to feel very good.
Exactly, exactly. And there are things that are flare worthy,
Oh,
right?
sure.
There are things that are worth that, but again, having that knowledge of if I do this, then this happens, you can then plan for what is my recovery going to look like? Do I need to give myself extra space? Do I need to schedule an extra visit to the chiropractor? Whatever your thing might be. And I just realized as I said that you listening are probably thinking, "Well, yeah, but I don't know," right? Like, "I don't know. Where did this flare come from? What did I do this time?" It could be a million things.
Hmm.
And I think this is where that, practicing a very practical kind of mindfulness, one of the exercises I give my clients is called the Book of You, and it's really a book about you, and you just write down your observations of, "I did this, that happened,"
Hmm.
right?
Hmm. Yeah. Cause I would agree when I first was diagnosed or when I was first not feeling well, that was several years of not feeling well, but I didn't, I didn't put my finger on like what made me not feel well. Right. It was
Right.
like some days I don't feel good and some days I'm fine. And it just seemed very random. And
Mhm.
now I know it's not, right? Like
Right.
but it took me stepping away from a lot and really like taking some very deliberate downtime and then adding things back in and observing, like, okay, how did that go for me? And then
Exactly, yeah.
was it
Yeah.
too much? Was it too little?
Mhm.
Yeah. And one saying that I got from you that I really abide by is like saying no so that you can say yes. Right.
My
And
favorite.
Because for me, like, I'm a doer. I want to do everything and I have major FOMO. Right? So I don't want to miss out on anything, but I also want to feel better. Right?
And no matter who you are, you can't do it all,
And
right?
that
You
was
know,
a really hard pill to swallow, I gotta say. But yes.
but I mean, it's true for everybody that exists, right? Like Steve Jobs has a quote that he's just as proud of the things that they don't do as of the things that they do. And it's by focusing, on the things, not focusing on the things you don't do, and focusing on what you do, that you get to be really good, right?
Yeah.
That you get
Yeah.
to do miraculous things. No matter who you are, you cannot do it all. For us, that situation happens to be a little more amplified. We're a little more aware that maybe, our can't do everything is maybe even a little bit smaller. But it just means that our choices matter more.
Right. And we get to prioritize those things that we're really passionate about and that really mean the most to us, right? And that's what I found as I was getting better was like I got very clear on what mattered to me, what my
Mhm.
values were, and then saying yes to those things, but saying no to the others so that I had the space to do those things that were most meaningful.
Mhm. 'Cause there's nothing worse than saying yes to something and then having the thing you really wanna do come up and you have to say no to it
Oh,
because you just don't have space for it, right?
exactly.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so how do you coach your students and your clients to accept that we're not superhuman, that we can't do everything and to just be okay with doing less?
such a good question. And honestly, it depends a little bit on the person. One
Mhm.
of the new things that I've just created is a quiz that kind of helps you figure
Mm.
some of this out. So it's your fibromyalgia wellness style, and it's based on psychology. But, there are some of us who are perfectionists, right? We want to do all the things. You're smiling. Right, and so that's gonna be a different conversation than somebody I happen to be the playmaker. I judge everything by, "Is this gonna be fun or not?" Right?
Mm.
So for me, it's a lot easier to say no so that I can say yes, because if it's not fun, I don't wanna do it anyway.
Uh-huh. Love
But
that.
then that gives me my own challenges, right? Because some of the things that are good for us aren't always fun, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So, knowing what your fibromyalgia wellness style is, which is really just your personality, psychology, but putting it in that framework of what does this mean to my fibromyalgia? And if you don't have fibromyalgia, you could also take the quiz. Everything will be in fibro terms, but it might still be helpful. But I think knowing that helps change that conversation. Um, for a playmaker, it's really important to have fun. So we would talk about how to prioritize those fun things just so that need is met.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
Right? And for the perfectionist, we would talk about, how to be really good at fewer things. So instead of
Mm.
taking your whole like maybe you do everything at 100%, now we're only going to do it at 60%. That is not going to go over well with a perfectionist. But maybe we can only do a few things at 100% instead of trying to do everything at 100%, right? So how we would approach that depends a lot on your personality and who you are. But yes, that is definitely a challenge. And fibromyalgia often feels like a long taking away of things,
Mhm,
right? Like you
mhm.
lose your health, sometimes you lose your hobbies, you might lose your job, you might lose friends, family, right? And so we don't want to take away more things, but
Yeah.
what we do want to do is two things in particular. One is that tracking we were talking about just for information's sake. That tracking is not there as a standard for you to live up to. It is just information. So we track it just so we have the data to maybe make different choices. And then the other thing is adding in good things. So I wouldn't necessarily tell a client to stop doing something, but I might tell them they need to add in more rest.
Mhm.
It might look the same on the calendar, but it feels very different.
And I mean, it's similar to how I coach with food and movement, right? Is like make
Yeah,
that you're giving yourself those things that you enjoy and that satisfy you and you like that you love, right? Because
right.
then you just you feel better and that other stuff, it's not that you want to like restrict it, but it's just make sure you're getting the stuff that you really love in there and then it just makes all that difference.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, apart from tracking, was there anything else in your own personal journey that really made a big difference in helping you move from what was almost disability to now is pretty much remission? Like, you really don't
Mhm.
experience symptoms anymore.
No, no.
Mm.
I the last time I had fibro pain, it was New Year's Eve, 2017. We were staying at a hotel and the bed was too hard.
Oh, I get that.
So, there's that. But yeah, so, I did file for disability. I got better before I, got in front of a judge, but I did file for disability and I am in remission now. And that, there's a lot of things along the way. I kind of think of the healing with I think, of course, of fibromyalgia, but it would apply to anything, is being really 3 things. You've got the fact that there is something going wrong in your body, like, there is some things to fix, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Whether that's hormonal imbalances, nutritional deficiencies, your body going haywire, processing pain, there are things going wrong, so we do have to address that.
mhm,
There's also, of course, the lifestyle piece of things, right? We need to have good sleep habits. We need to give our body good nutrition. That push crash cycle that we talked about. Those are all those lifestyle pieces.
mhm,
And then the third piece is that mindset, how we think about our illness, how we think about our bodies, just how we approach life. And it's kind of like a three-legged stool, you really need all of them to be able to improve. So for me, in my journey, there were a lot of things that we uncovered along the way. I found out I have autoimmune thyroid. I mean,
mhm.
I have a sleeping disorder. I found all these things. And I remember complaining to my doctor once, I come in here to get better, but every time I leave, I have a new diagnosis, you know? But once you can do something about it, so that's
Exactly.
not all bad. So, there were a lot of those things
Mhm,
that I had to fix. The lifestyle piece and the mindset piece, again, I think a lot of that was working with my coach and her like, "Okay, how can we do this different?"
mhm.
Or strategize with me. "Yes, I know I need to go to bed at a decent time to get," but how? "Oh, do
Yeah.
I do this?" Right? And her help in going through all of that. And I think a lot of the mindset shift was just, some of it was just me, right? Just the way I was wired. I also had a really great role model in my mom. I actually only realized this just a couple of years ago, but
Mm,
my mom is really afraid of heights. And so growing up, my mom, like, she never went up in the Space Needle with us, right? Like, she was
mhm.
down on the ground, and it was never a big deal. It
Yeah.
was just, "You guys go have fun, I'll sit here, I'll watch the people, I'm just fine,"
Mhm.
right? And so that no drama approach to saying no
Oh,
was extremely helpful,
yeah.
for me to speak up for my own needs in a way that wasn't, you know, didn't make people feel bad, didn't make me
Mm.
feel bad, like, it's just,
Yeah,
this
like,
is
no
what I need.
shame in it, right?
Yeah,
Like
I call it unapologetic
yeah.
self-care,
Yeah.
right? We all need self-care,
I
and
wanna
there's
talk
no reason to apologize for it. Like, you need what you need. It's a thing, right?
it is a thing, it is a thing, and I mean, I know we're conditioned as women to put our needs at the bottom of the list, and that's true for everyone, chronic illness or not, like, we
Yeah,
all struggle
exactly.
with this, but I think, like, that's one of the gifts for me in having fibromyalgia is it forced me to ask and speak up for myself to, you
Absolutely.
get
Yes.
my own needs met because I had no choice. We should not have to get to that point. before we speak up for ourselves.
Mhm.
But speaking of self-care, I'd love to know how you teach self-care and how you define self-care because, it's not just spa days and bubble baths and these kinds of things, right?
Right. Right.
How do you approach self-care?
I love that you asked this question. This is actually the first lesson that I teach in my classes because it's the foundation for everything, right? For me, the definition of self-care is taking care of yourself the way that you would take care of somebody that you love and that you are responsible for their well-being.
Mhm.
So you might think of, if you're a mom and you have kids, you could think of your kids. I don't have kids. I think about my cats, right? Like sometimes I take them to the vet. They don't want to go, but I'm doing it because it's what's good for them,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But also the cuddles are good for them too, right? Like it's the whole spectrum. And I think that things like the bubble baths and going to the spa and all of that is really what we do because we are practicing good self-care.
Uh,
And massage for you, for example, might be torture, might
uh-huh.
be great for me. I mean, especially with a chronic pain condition, massage is not always awesome.
Mhm.
So like the thing itself can't really be the self-care.
Mhm.
It's deeper than that. It's the motivation, it's the emotion behind it. It's why we do what we do. And if you can kind of think of it more that way, then it doesn't have to cost you any time. It doesn't have to cost you any money. It doesn't have to look a certain way because it's about giving yourself what you need, and caring for yourself, right? So sometimes a Netflix binge and some ice cream might be practicing perfect self care.
Yeah, I'm on
And
board
other
with
times it might be a salad.
yeah, yeah, 100%. It can be both. It can be either one, and I think it also encompasses the way that we speak to ourselves, the thoughts that we
Yes.
think about ourselves, even if we don't say them out loud, right? Like
Oh gosh, yes. I mean, I started thinking at one point in my journey when this thought came to me about self-compassion and self-care, I started thinking about how I treated myself.
Mhm, mhm.
And I was like, "Oh my god, if this was a friend and they told me somebody was treating them this way,
Yeah,
I'd be like, 'We need an intervention. That's an
felt
abusive
different. Yeah.
relationship. Like, this is bad.'" I mean, I would eat things that I knew would make me feel bad, right? Basically poisoning myself. Right? I would push myself to exhaustion.
Mhm.
We would have back in my old life, I managed the support department for a software company, and we would have these big projects once a quarter. And it was not at all uncommon for me to like sit at my computer for 12, 14 hours and not really even get up to go to the bathroom, much less have a break, have lunch. I'm like, gosh, that's kind of like slave labor. And then the way I talk to myself in my head, I'm like, "Oh my lord, you're such a bully.
Oh,
Like,
I
you're a meanie."
Mhm, mhm. And
And
I'm right there with you. I was the same,
yeah.
like, yeah, pushing myself to work out when it was, like, causing me pain and injury, and even as I first got this diagnosis, I noticed a lot of self-talk along the lines of, like, blaming myself, like, "What did I do to cause this?" And
Yes.
you got, like, "It's all your fault, and had you only, like, listened to your body."
Notice
Like,
sooner. Yeah.
it was so mean, and actually, it was my therapist who was like, "What if you tried being nicer to yourself? Like, what if all of this was an invitation to meet yourself with compassion?" Right? But
Mhm.
and she made me aware of how, like, blame gives us the sense that then we can fix something. Like, if you caused it, then maybe I can fix it. But,
Right. And even if you blame yourself, right? Like, if you can pinpoint that
one
cause,
thing I did,
then
yeah,
it feels like you can find
in
an
control.
answer easier.
Yeah,
But sometimes there
yeah,
just really isn't a reason, and you couldn't have done anything differently. We did the best that we could with the knowledge we had at the time,
exactly.
you know? It's just
Yeah.
you have to accept. I think of it like a GPS. Okay, my husband my husband is, an aerospace engineer, and he's actually worked on various GPS things. And if you think about a GPS, with a GPS, you have to know where you are in order to get good directions. And so there is a certain amount of just like, where am I right now? Like,
Mhm.
what does my body need right now today? Not did I used to need? What do I think I should need? But like, really, right now, today, where am I? No judgment, just the facts, right? And
Yeah.
then also with the GPS, of course, you have to know where you're going,
Yes.
right? And so we do also need to hold that idea of where we want to be, because of course we don't want to stay stuck where we
Mhm.
are.
Mhm.
But we need both of those things, right? We can't only be looking in the future and be in denial about where we are. You're not going to get good directions and you're not going to make it.
Mhm. True. True. Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
Accepting the current reality while holding
yes,
holding the vision of a different one, right?
yes,
Taking
yes.
those little steps day by day to move in that direction. But you
Mm,
can't gaslight yourself to pretend that what you're currently experiencing isn't real.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think so often we miss that step
Mhm.
because we used to feel a different way, and over time, things have changed, and we haven't always noticed because a lot of times it happens so gradually. And then it feels like you wake up one day and you're in this body that you don't recognize, and you don't know what she needs,
Yeah.
right? And so we do have to, like, oh, tune back into that. And I think it can help. One of the assignments that I give in class is to think about those other people that you care for in that way, and how can you then borrow some of that, right? Like,
Mhm.
if your best friend
Mhm.
didn't get something done, would
Yeah.
you be mean to her? Would you talk to her the way you talk to yourself if you didn't get the thing done? Of course not. You'd be like, fine, you know?
Yeah.
So using those types of relationships to reflect on yourself, and then also thinking about the people who love us and take care of us, you know? Sometimes that's a pet, sometimes that's a parent, sometimes that's a spouse,
Mhm.
right? But there are people in your life who do love you that way.
Yes.
And, sometimes it can be really, I've had students who are like, whenever I start to feel hard on myself, I just think, what would my boyfriend say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And the first step is becoming aware, like just noticing, like, what is the language I'm using towards myself, and then
Right.
catching it and choosing to reframe that.
Hmm.
So, what advice can you offer, or what steps might a person go through if they're dealing with a chronic illness and they're just really stuck, focusing on their illness and fighting against their illness and feeling like betrayed by their body and like nothing is working? Where might they start in coming into a relationship of friendship with their body?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think there's 2 or 3 things that come to mind for me. The first one is just processing those thoughts, right? So journaling.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of research that shows that if you can get that outside of your body, that it actually helps. So, like, one of the journaling with chronic pain, I've been to a few classes like that. Just writing about your pain can actually help lower your pain, which seems backwards, right? Because it seems like you would be focusing on it more, but the way I think of it is getting it outside of myself,
Yeah.
right? Like, I'm vomiting it up almost,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're getting rid of it.
Yeah.
The second thing is, if you don't have that kind of self-talk, you might even live somewhere where your environment doesn't include a lot of positive self-talk. Find a way to get a positive voice in your life. I know 2 great podcasts you could listen to. But, having that positive voice, it can be a great example of different ways to think, right? If you don't think that way, if you haven't thought that way, the people around you don't think that way, how are you need an example, right? So having that positive voice, books that you read, things that you listen to, that can be super helpful. And it doesn't even need to be specifically about your illness, right? Like, it could be just in general, people who look at the glass a little more half full than half empty, right? Just
Yeah.
how do we shift from that negative focus to a more positive focus?
Yeah.
And then the third thing, I mean, I am a huge fan of working with coaches, not because I am a coach, but because it was a coach that changed my life. She was absolutely instrumental in helping me make that shift. Because that's the thing about these unconscious habits, right? They're unconscious.
Yes.
How do you change something you don't even know you're doing?
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so you gotta have that outside perspective to sort of gently come alongside you and say, "Hey, did you see what you
Well,
just
you're
did
doing
there?
that.
Did you hear that?" And, I'm using the example of a coach, but this could also be a therapist. It could be a spiritual advisor. It could be your best friend. But it is helpful to have a professional
Mhm.
because we know how to take ourselves out of the equation and
Yes.
make it be just about you. Your best friend, there might be things she doesn't necessarily want you to change because she likes you like you are.
Or they say what you want to hear, or what they think you want to hear, right?
Right, instead of what's truly helpful, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
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 So, those are
No.
the 3 things that I think I would start with. Do some journaling,
Mhm.
get some voices, some positive voices around you that you can listen to, and if you need to, talk to somebody, get some actual help in shifting that.
Yeah. Those are all great tips. I love that. One thing that I love that you say many times in your podcast is changing your focus from your illness to healing, right? And
Yep,
all three of those steps that you just mentioned are a great way to do that, right? To start shifting
absolutely.
into a mindset of healing rather than just constantly dwelling on how crappy you feel in your illness.
Yes, yes, and, I think so many of us start, of course, with the focus on our illness because it's the thing that's happening, right? We notice, "Oh, I'm feeling terrible," or, "Oh, I'm in so much pain," or, whatever it is, and, of course, we're focused on that, but I noticed with myself, if I started to make decisions not based on, like, trying to run away from how bad I felt, but
Mhm.
trying to move towards feeling better, it might look exactly the same. Maybe the
Uh-huh.
answer in both
Uh-huh.
cases is, "No, I'm not gonna go to a late show at the movie
Yep.
theater." But why I'm choosing that, one is really more of almost a victim mindset, right?
Uh-huh.
I
Uh-huh.
can't because this
Yeah.
is happening to me,
Yeah.
right? And the other one is so much more empowered. I'm
Right.
choosing not to do that so that I can feel better tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what we're all about here on the Power in Motion podcast is empowering you to make those decisions that are right for you. And I think that's such a poignant way of putting this. Like what you do might end up looking exactly the same, but you're doing it from a totally different intention of I am choosing to move in this direction because it supports me to feel the way that I want to feel rather than feeling like a victim and I can't do anything that I want to do. It just keeps us stuck
Mhm.
in our symptoms, right?
And I think it's makes for easier conversations with the people around us
Yeah.
too,
Yeah.
right? If you tell somebody, "Oh, I can't do that," of course you're gonna run into, sure
Of
you
course you
can,"
can. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But if you say to somebody, "You know what? I don't really want to do that because I wanna feel better tomorrow,"
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a completely different conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I could go, but this is what it would cost me. And I think, friends who care about you will understand that.
Mhm.
Yeah. 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 This such a valuable conversation. There've been so many great pearls of wisdom in this, Tammy. Can you wrap us up by telling us how you support both clients and other professionals and then where people can keep in touch with you after they listen to this episode?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I do from time to time still do one-on-one work, helping women with fibromyalgia. As a certified fibromyalgia coach, I help educate you, right? I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose you. I can't prescribe anything like that.
Mhm.
But I am absolutely an expert in fibromyalgia. So I can teach you about your illness. I've also lived it, right? So I
Mhm.
can give you tips and tricks from my own life. I can help you with that mindset shift, all of those things. And in the end, the goal is to get you feeling better, right? Less pain, more energy, better sleep, all of that. I also discovered, partway along the way in my journey that I can't help everybody.
Much as
So
you'd
back
love to, I'm sure.
there's just a couple more people than I could help. So I did start training coaches back in 2015. It's been almost 10 years now.
Wow.
But I do have a training program. We have a certified fibromyalgia advisor program that teaches you all the fibro bits. We have a lot of patients who take that who have no intention of working with anybody. And the reason for that is because our students, on average, are able to improve their fibromyalgia by about 50% during the 3-month class. So it's a big deal. And then after that, if you do want to work with people, of course, I have the fibromyalgia coach certification. We teach you how to actually work with fibromyalgia patients because coaching people with fibromyalgia is a little bit different. So, if you have a traditional, health and wellness coach certification, there's some things you're going to need to tweak if you want to work with this population. So we do I have that training as well. We've got continuing education, of course, the podcast, all sorts of fun things. The best way to connect with me is actually my podcast website, which is fibromyalgiapodcast.com. And everything is on there. You can find my books for free. That quiz I was talking about, that's on there. And then information on either finding a coach to work with, whether it's me or one of the people I've trained, or, taking the class, becoming a coach yourself. You can get it all from there. And if you're looking for an easy way to just kind of learn more about fibromyalgia, about me, what I do, about yourself, even, just go check out the podcast. You'll find it in all your favorite podcast apps and on that website. So,
You are so generous with your knowledge. I want to make sure I say that there's so much on that podcast that is helpful, so there's a lot you
thanks.
can learn for free. And you have your free books and your quizzes and all of that yet too. And then the paid services for those who want to go to the next level. Everything's
Yep.
there for you. Yeah. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and share your wisdom on the show today. Is there anything else that's pressing on your heart that you want to share before we sign off for today?
Yes, the big thing that if you're listening and you have fibromyalgia, you have probably been told by your doctor there's not a lot that can be done. Maybe
Mhm,
you've had one
mhm.
conversation and been sent on your way, like Kim shared a couple episodes ago about her story. I want you to know that there is hope. You
Mhm.
can feel better. Your doctor was not taught in medical school how to treat you.
Yeah.
They are given a lot of information about a lot of things, but they don't go very deep. So they might know what fibromyalgia is, but not really know how to help you. There are people who can help you. A lot of times, a coach can fill that gap of knowledge and work with both you and your doctor. But absolutely, you can feel better than you feel right now today. Less pain, more energy, better sleep, less brain fog. You can have the life that you want to live.
Ugh, there is hope, right? And that is such a important note to end on because I know I felt very hopeless at the beginning and hearing your podcast did help me feel more hopeful in the face of all of that. So, thank you for sharing that and for being here today. It's been an honor to have you, Tammy.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.